Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 156. On the one hand, the other party wanted to prove his innocence. On the other hand, he also wanted to make up for his previous mistakes, especially towards Ichigo Kurosaki. Unconsciously, Abaririnji had already regarded Ichigo Kurosaki as both an opponent and a friend. In Uehara Shirowa's opinion, although Abaririnji and Grinja talked tough about catching up to Ichigo Kurosaki, the talent gap between these two and Ichigo was like the difference between Krillin and Goku. They could only talk big. But good friends were like this, and the friendship between men was understandable. While thinking, Uehara Shirowa looked at the desert stretching out before him. Small animal hollows scurried around in the distance. Further away, a Ryatsu different from ordinary hollows was sneaking closer. It had to be the guardian of the White Sands, the one who was very much alive. Strictly speaking, hollows weren't a necessary part of the soul particle cycle. After living beings died in this world, those who reached the end of their natural lifespan would directly enter reincarnation. Spirits who died for other reasons had the opportunity to enter the Soul Society and become residents of Rokangai. Of course, those with lingering obsessions would become hollows. Hollows born in the real world would instinctively devour souls to grow, and when they reached a certain level, they would go to Hueco Mundo to continue evolving. In the world of the Shinigami, the real world was equivalent to the living world, where matter and life were composed of particles. Soul Society was the residence of spirits, where the Shinigami dwelled. Hueco Mundo was the residence of hollows. As for hell, the extremely evil spirits would be imprisoned there to receive punishment. Even without hollows, the spirits and souls of the Shinigami world could still achieve circulation. But Hueco Mundo must exist because it was a necessary part of the world's balance. The world of the Shinigami was composed of the real world, Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and Hell. The Ryatsu strength of these four parts, or the strength of the spirits and souls, must maintain a balance within a certain range. Simply put, the world of the Shinigami was a small balance on a large balance. The left and right ends of the small balance were Hueco Mundo and Soul Society, the fulcrum was the real world, and the wedge was the Soul King. Therefore, the number of souls in Hueco Mundo and Soul Society must be equal. Otherwise, the two worlds would approach and collide, eventually leading to the destruction of the three realms. At the same time, the living world and the Soul King must exist, otherwise, without the support of the fulcrum wedge, the three realms would collapse and merge into one. The Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the living world as a whole constituted the two ends of a large balance with Hell. The strength of the souls on both sides must remain balanced. Otherwise, the seal of Hell would be unlocked, and some very bad things would happen, such as the ancestors opening the coffin. Uehara Shirowa guessed that the reason why the monk didn't immediately take action against Aizen and Yawatch was to prevent Hell from making trouble. After all, the Ryatsu possessed by these two people was the main force keeping Hell sealed. In Hell, there were unknown existences that even the Soul King couldn't see through. So at the beginning, the monk only sealed Yawatch's all-knowing and omnipotent eyes. Balance was the purpose of the Shinigami and the monk. Uehara Shirowa wasn't worried about this seesaw world that was somewhat subtle and somewhat dangerous. Even if the worst happened, it wouldn't stop him from playing music and dancing, nor would it stop him from continuing his tasks and becoming stronger. As long as he completed the daily tasks, Uehara Shirowa could gain attribute points. As a result, his Ryatsu and basic abilities could be improved, and the improvement was based on the percentage of his current strength. Therefore, the later he gained attribute points, the stronger the improvement effect would be, and the faster his strength would increase. The most important thing was that such improvement ignored any bottlenecks, there was no limit at all. So as long as he lived long enough and completed more tasks, he could even surpass the only true god in the world of death. At that time, even if the world collapsed, he could rebuild it in a minute and create a more perfect world. What the Soul King could do, he could do, and even better. While thinking, Uehara Shiroa grabbed a handful of desert sand and released his perfect level of observation haki. The ability to see everything activated. He immediately locked onto the faint wool within the sand. This wool was like Hueco Mundo itself, lifeless, yet full of primitive instincts and desires. If Hueco Mundo was a world of the dead, then this wool was the will of the dead, a corpse-like existence. It seemed the legend was true. This desert had been transformed from a great hollow killed by the Soul King in ancient times. To be precise, the main body of the desert should be the corpse of the ancient Great Hollow that had devoured the world. The so-called valleys were the remains of high-level souls in the broken world. The Ryatsu of their remaining erasure was too strong, forming small worlds. Therefore, it could be inferred that Hueco Mundo was the transformation of erasure after the death of the ancient Great Hollow. By the same token, every erasure world independent of the real world might have some extremely powerful will and Ryatsu. Then what about Soul Society? What about Hell? Uehara Shiroa sighed secretly. Aizen was right about this. This world is indeed built on corpses. Every world has a corresponding will secretly controlling it. This will is the rule by which the world operates. However, I don't like this kind of will, this kind of power, and this kind of rule. While he was thinking, Nell thought out. She gasped and said, "That was so dangerous. I almost died. That icy feeling was quite interesting, but way too dangerous. Damn Shinigami you. What did you call me?" Uehara Shiroa glanced over. He had just used a little bit of his stand power. Otherwise, Nell would never have thought in this lifetime. Noticing Uehara Shiroa's eyes, Nell immediately admitted her mistake. "I'm sorry, Lord Shinigami. I was too loud just now." As the two were talking, Nell suddenly discovered that the nearby desert had undergone strange changes. White gravel scattered, and a huge, terrifying hollow made of sand appeared before them. Looking at the familiar white sand guardian, Nell was almost scared to death and exclaimed, "Lord Runaganga has appeared again. Intruder, die." Runaganga faithfully carried out his task of destroying invaders. Hollows relied on their bodies to survive. Their defense and vitality were stronger than those of Shinigami and Quincy of the same strength. This was even more true for Arrancar. Therefore, after Ichigo Kurosaki's random slashing and Rukia's initial freezing attack, Runaganga still had the strength to fight. According to Aizen's order, any stranger who entered the range of Las Noches must die. A large amount of white sand rolled towards Uehara Shiroha and Nell. Again? Nell opened her mouth wide and swallowed another mouthful of sand, her face contorted with horror. Facing the threat of death once more, the hidden power and memory in her body began to stir. Facing the sandstorm, Uehara Shiroa snorted coldly, his body standing firm. Ryatsu burst out from the air, blasting away the rolling sand waves, and locked onto Runaganga, who was controlling the sandstorm. The guardian of the white sand felt his body growing extremely heavy. His form gradually fell apart, and his mind began to slip into darkness. He murmured to himself, "Lord Aizen, I'm sorry." The enemy's attack was so horrifying that he was completely helpless. Until the end, he didn't know what had happened. His body made of sand grains was immune to Zangetsu's attack, but it couldn't stop the terrifying attack that crushed even sand grains into powder. As the wind blew, Runaganga's torn body turned into the purest spirit dust and drifted away. Soon, there was no trace of Runaganga in the world. This Arrancar died more cleanly and thoroughly than those ancient great hollows. This was the Ryatsu shock that belonged to Uehara Shiroha. The unity of man and sword plus the unlimited blade works made his Ryatsu shock have terrifying power. His Ryatsu shock could not only deter others at the spiritual level but also possessed physical destructive power and ability that ordinary Ryatsu shocks did not have. Just like Conqueror's Haki is a top talent that only one in a million has, causing mental deterrence to the weak and clearing away soldiers. If the realm is higher, it can achieve the entanglement of King's Haki, which can cause a double attack on the enemy's spirit and body. And Uehara Shiroha's Haki seemed to have its own entanglement ability. With one impact, the weak fell to the ground, the strong bled, and hearts were damaged. This invisible killing power was truly terrifying.
Its power was equivalent to the Bankai of an ordinary Shinigami captain. How could this combat power not be strong?
Just like Aizen could use Ryatsu to intimidate Grimmjow, making his consciousness blur and rendering him unable to move. But if Aizen really wanted to kill someone, he still needed to use sword techniques or Kido. Unless the difference in Ryatsu between the two sides was several dimensions apart, then the stronger could use Ryatsu to directly annihilate the soul of the weaker. Just like when Aizen was sealed in a chair, he could still rely on Ryatsu to evaporate the body of an ordinary Shinigami. But this was only a special case, and an opponent's Ryatsu didn't actually have the effect of a physical attack. Uehara Shirowa's Ryatsu was different. With a single Ryatsu impact, Grimmjow's body and mind would be torn apart. This attack method was comparable to the Black Torrent formed by the residual Ryatsu of the Soul King, and it was immensely powerful. There were many ways to be immune to sword techniques or strange abilities, but there were almost no ways to be immune to Ryatsu. In the eyes of ordinary people, this was even more like a godlike power. Nell, for example, was shocked in that moment. Although her little brain was sometimes smart and sometimes not, she also knew how weird and terrifying the scene in front of her was.
Dead. How is that possible? Nell's expression was so distorted with shock that it almost became a meme. The invincible White Sand Guardian had actually fallen. The body of sand that wasn't afraid of being slashed had broken into pieces and shattered into dust. And throughout the process, Shiroa Uehara's body hadn't even moved. What was going on? And putting all this aside, would she be killed to silence her? It wasn't surprising that Nell had such thoughts. After all, in her opinion, Las Noches and Aizen were extremely powerful and invincible. And killing the Guardian of Las Noches was a big deal. More importantly, Shiroa gave her the feeling that he wasn't someone to mess with. Seeing that Nell's eyes were getting clearer, Shiroa knew this little thing was thinking nonsense again. He said, "Now that you've discovered it, there's nothing we can do. How many pieces should I cut you into?" "No, Nell is very useful." Noticing the look in Uehara Shiroa's eyes as if he was looking at pork on a chopping board, Nell's body trembled and she said quickly, "My saliva can heal wounds. I am very good at playing hide and seek." "Wait a minute." Shiroa took out the horse talisman and shot it at Nell. A white light flashed, and all the minor injuries on her body healed. But Nell's body did not grow bigger and returned to the royal sister form from Retrace Espada days. Nell looked at the horse talisman in Uehara Shiroa's hand with sparkling eyes. "What is this?" "So comfortable. Just like the legendary sunshine." Just now, bathing in the white light, she'd felt warm all over and full of strength. Her body had become swollen. She instinctively realized that if she let this feeling continue, she might really grow a brain. But fortunately, she suppressed this feeling by force. Looking at Nell with her silly face, Uehara Shiroa understood in his heart, it's not that the horse talisman isn't powerful enough. It's that Nell is in a normal state now. At least, that's what she thinks. Maybe deep down, this peace-loving person would rather keep this harmless appearance. She's really deceiving herself. However, it didn't matter if she couldn't change back for the time being, he wasn't picky. It was easier to deceive a child. And considering her real age, he wasn't exploiting child labor. Want to compete? Seeing Uehara Shiroa staring at her, Nell thought he wanted to play a staring game with her. She stared at Uehara Shiroa without blinking, and her look became more and more silly and cute. She completely forgot her fear from moments ago. Uehara Shiroa casually threw a big slap at Nell's head, making her lose her balance. "I won." Hateful, despicable. Nell, who was hit on the back of her head for no apparent reason, was in tears and her head was buzzing. If she hadn't been unable to beat him, she would have pounced on him and bitten him to death. Uehara Shiroa picked up Nell with one hand like he was holding a fish and said casually, "It just so happens that my base needs a gatekeeper. I see that you have a fine figure and are a natural worker. So you'll come guard the gate for me. If you work hard, I'll give you a raise at the end of the year." Aizen's approach at Las Noches was really too kind. He held a meeting every 10 days, never worked overtime, and even gave tea to drink. Was this charity? No wonder some of the Espada didn't work hard, but just slacked off to gain seniority. Their slogans were quite loud, and they were all very arrogant, but their records were all zero. In a fight, they were either stupid, reckless, or soft-hearted. They were all incapable of taking on big responsibilities, and the strengthening of the Hogyoku was in vain. The combined effects and records of all the hollows weren't as good as those of the brainless Wonderweiss. At least he defeated Kensei, sealed Ryujin Jaka, dug out Yukite's heart, and almost stole Urahara's victory. This role was great, and it wasn't too much to give him an MVP. In comparison, the performance of the other Espada was a bit unsightly. No wonder Aizen turned against them in the end and started to clean house. All this must be the fault of the system. If Uehara were to replace Aizen, he would definitely arrange for clock-in, daily performance, and benefit. In this way, there would be no need to worry that Hueco Mundo wouldn't become bigger and stronger and create greater glory. What is a worker? Thinking she was being praised, Nell grinned and laughed out loud. She had never enjoyed these before and thought it was some new game, eager to try it. Uehara Shiroa glanced at the little thing that was so proud and thought to himself, laugh, laugh, there will be a time for you to cry. I want to see how long you can endure. Along the way, the two met a few ignorant Arankars. These Arankars rushed over and shouted. Killed as Shinigami. For Lord Aizen. Die. Chapter 157. Uehara Shiroa shook his head. This greeting is not very polite. After saying that, he activated Tenjin Shuunpa and passed by these Arankar. When he landed, the Arankar's figures shook and all fell to the ground. At that moment, his Ryatsu had already chopped the bodies of these Arankar into pieces. The strong and tough bodies of the Arankar were like tofu under the impact of his powerful Ryatsu, breaking at the slightest touch. Seeing this horrifying scene, Neliel trembled even more. This man was really too cruel. Swish, 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 these Arankars died, easier than crushing bugs. So terrifying. She decided to take good care of the gate and become the gatekeeper. Really good Ryatsu. Aizen praised from his throne in Las Noches. Kaname Tozen next to him frowned and asked. That Shiroa unexpectedly came to Hueco Mundo. Lord Aizen, is everything alright? To be honest, he had very complicated feelings about Shiroha. On the one hand, the other party was disorganized and undisciplined, completely disregarding the law and acting arbitrarily, even more hollow than the hollows. If everyone acted as recklessly as Uehara Shiroa, then where was justice, order, and righteousness? Yes, although Tozen slaughtered civilians, killed innocent people indiscriminately, conducted countless human experiments, cooperated with hollows, and betrayed his companions, but deep in his heart, he insisted that he was still the good boy with justice, principles, and morality. Therefore, he could not allow people like Shiroa who destroyed order and justice to exist. This was a matter of principle. But on the other hand, Shiroa was extremely powerful, and he killed nobles cleanly and neatly, more cruelly than they did. Especially the Tsuneyushiro family, it was a complete annihilation. Although Tozen talked about righteousness, he was secretly happy in his heart when he saw his enemy's tragic death. Of course, vigilance was also indispensable. The Tsuneyushiro family had been rampant in Seoul society for so many years and had always stood firm. Everyone had to look up to them, thinking that this family had a very powerful trump card. As a result, a great noble family was silently wiped out by Shiroha. A powerful force that could call the wind and rain in Seoul society was destroyed like a bubble. Tozen was ashamed of his means and strength of turning his hand to make clouds and turning his hand to make rain. He feared that only Lord Aizen could do this. With such courage and ability, it was not surprising that Shiroha could do anything. Therefore, Tozen had always been very wary of him. Aizen, however, looked unconcerned. Don't worry, we have already greeted each other. The tacit understanding before was also a test. The result is obvious. No matter what purpose Uehara Shiroha has, he will not affect our plan. In fact, Aizen was also very curious about what Uehara Shiroha's plan and purpose were. Before, he had made many guesses and prepared sufficiently. Then, very rarely, all his predictions were wrong.
Even Aizen had to admit that Shiroha was truly a mystery, and he could not see through him at all. It seems that my old classmate is very confident in his own strength.
Jin Ikimaro calmly put some eye drops on Uehara Shiroha.
Of course, it was just a superficial comment. He seemed to be emphasizing the threat of Uehara Shiroha, but in fact he was confident. Because he knew how confident Aizen was, and Aizen even longed for the emergence of an opponent who could fight him. Therefore, the stronger Shiroha was, the more excited and expectant Aizen became. Jin was deliberately hiding his weakness and acting for Aizen. Aizen would definitely see through Jin's first intention, but in this way, he might ignore his true intention. However, Aizen had seen through Jin's second intention as well, and was just playing along. The few old foxes in the world of Shinigami were all 1,000-layer cakes, with all kinds of nesting dolls and 10,000 eyes. For Shiroha, no matter what conspiracy the enemy had, it didn't matter. Without the support of power, a plan was just a bubble. With his strength, knowledge, and intelligence, no one could outplan him, he could only outplan them. However, Ichigo Kurosaki and the others were not so lucky. After a fierce battle, they left the forest of Minos through the underground passage and came to Las Noches.
Because Runaganga had been dealt with by Uehara Shiroha, they came to the rock passage in front of Las Noches smoothly. Pesh and Dondo Chaka also followed. The two Arankar thought that Nell had been captured and brought to Las Noches.
The two were originally subordinates of Neliel.
Back then, Neutra and Sailaparo had plotted against Neliel and severely injured her.
Since then, the former Tres Espada Neliel had lost most of her power and memory, becoming the child she was now.
Pesh and Dondo Chaka, as her subordinates, never left Nell, but they never dared to get close to Las Noches.
However, now that Nell had been captured and taken to Las Noches, the situation was serious. Pesh and Dondo Chaka were worried that Neutra would continue to harm Nell. Therefore, the two followed Ichigo and the others to Las Noches, intending to save Nell at all costs. It was not until they entered Las Noches that Ichigo Kurosaki, Yasutora Sato, Yuri Ueshida, and Rukia understood its structure. From the outside, Las Noches was a huge city with a simple style, composed of massive rock walls. There was a huge dome on top, and around it were columnar white towers with windows. Only when they came inside did they discover that the dome and the surrounding walls were actually an enclosure. Under the huge dome was where the city was located. Here, the sky was blocked. The columnar towers outside the dome, and the various tower-shaped buildings inside Las Noches were the main body of the city and where everyone resided. This was in sharp contrast to Seoul society. The architectural style of Seoul society was antique and in line with the living world. However, the tower-like structures and various arc lines of Las Noches couldn't be found in the living world or Seoul society at all, giving it a magical sense of alienation. In the huge city under the dome, there were 5 massive columnar towers. This was the administrative center of Las Noches. Among them, Aizen's throne palace was in the 5th tower. Faced with this magnificent and huge building complex full of futuristic, sci-fi style, Ichigo Kurosaki and the others were shocked. As a civilized building complex like a desert island, its existence itself and its huge scale were shocking enough. Not to mention, Las Noches was full of exotic styles that made people feel bewildered. Following the rock passage, they came to a hall with 5 doors. Behind each door was a passage, and no one knew where they led, nor did they know what enemies awaited them ahead. But there was an astonishing Ryatsu in each passage. This showed that the enemies ahead were extremely powerful, and there was no telling how many such enemies existed in the entirety of Las Noches. This battle was indeed extremely dangerous and difficult. After some debate, they decided to split up. Although in traditional suspense horror movies, their actions would be suicidal, Las Noches was so vast. They had no intelligence support, and the efficiency of group action was too low. Therefore, they could only act separately. All of this was within Aizen's calculations. Aizen was very considerate and arranged a person who matched their strength behind each passage, a boss. Aizen really took great pains to ensure the healthy growth of his godson. Whether it was Ichigo Kurosaki who came to rescue, Orihime Inoue in Las Noches, or the Gotei 13 who were actively carrying out defense operations, all were clearly arranged by Aizen. Without strength and awareness, people would be treated as chess pieces and placed on the chessboard at will, unable to even control their own life and death.
In Las Noches, Ulquiorra walked out of Orihime Inoue's room at a leisurely pace.
He thought to himself very calmly, being in the enemy's base camp, facing heavy pressure and the news that her companions were coming to rescue her, the woman's mood was only shaken for a moment. Facing my temptation, she didn't even move her eyebrows, and said what we wanted to hear without hesitation.
What a strong woman!
Of course, her little thoughts couldn't be hidden from his eyes.
But he didn't expect that a seemingly weak human woman could persist to this extent.
This surprised him very much and left him a little confused.
What kind of thing was supporting her? What kind of power could make this insect-like weak human so strong? At this time, Neutra, who was hiding in the dark, suddenly spoke. How is your woman? Has she adapted to life here? If she's not used to it, I don't mind helping you.
He had no interest in that weak woman. Although the ability to reject everything sounded intimidating, he was confident that he would not be injured, so he did not need treatment at all. This was the confidence of having the strongest hierro among the Espada.
However, he was very interested in the reason why Aizen valued Orihime Inoue.
In his opinion, the Hogyoku was a good thing.
Moreover, he was a little bored.
Since dealing with that stupid woman Neliel, Neutra had not had a decent battle for a long time. He longed for fighting and killing. Now he urgently needed a battle to prove himself.
Boring.
Ulquiorra's face turned cold and he warned, first of all, she is not my woman, secondly, it has nothing to do with you. Thirdly, the existence of that woman is related to Lord Aizen's plan.
I will not allow you to mess with it.
He couldn't understand why these people were so keen on provoking him.
This would only consume their meaningless lives faster. How stupid.
Neutra shrugged, as if he had thought of something. He said with a weird smile, why did the couple quarrel? How did they do this? Why did the girl willingly help us? Was it because of the illusion?
In fact, most of the Espada didn't understand Aizen's previous actions.
According to their style, if they liked something, they would just take it, and if they couldn't get it, they would destroy it.
However, Aizen's behavior was a bit confusing.
Not only did he let the enemy enter his base, but he also told the other party the most core secrets.
Was it really okay to trust a human woman so much?
And Neutra was a little dissatisfied that Ulquiorra was given the sole responsibility of guarding the woman.
He thought he was good at dealing with women.
There is no need to use Kyokusuajetsu to deal with that woman, she is not qualified.
Ulquiorra said disdainfully.
Lord Aizen had only set a trap that she would definitely fall into, nothing more. First, he threatened Orihime Inoue with the lives of her companions. Second, he gave her time to say goodbye, and she could only say goodbye to one person. By doing this, she would think that she came to Hueco Mundo of her own will. In addition, the people in the Gotiei 13 would also think so they refused to rescue Orihime Inoue and distanced themselves from her.
This was Lord Aizen's plan. So that's it. Neutra exclaimed.
I didn't expect that they had planned so far ahead and prepared so perfectly.
They really put a lot of effort into it. Ulquiorra corrected him, don't get me wrong. For Aizen-sama, this is just a pastime. At this level, Aizen-sama can do it easily, without any special arrangements.
And no matter what Inoue Orihime chooses, it will not affect our plan in the slightest. Neutra felt that there was no point in talking about this, so he forcefully changed the subject.
I heard that Uehara Shiroa appeared. Is he really that strong? I have also heard those rumors about him, it's just like a myth. You have fought with him, how do you feel? Because of Aizen's arrangement, Neutra didn't know that Ulquiorra and Yami were beaten badly by Uehara Shiroa last time.
In his opinion, the two of them just had a face-to-face encounter with Uehara Shiroa. It seemed that the guy was nothing special. However, in Hueco Mundo, the legend of the White Devil had never died out, and even several of the original Espada were killed by this man. In his home court, as an Arrancar, he even lost his life, which was really quite embarrassing. This seemed to suggest that Uehara Shiroa's strength was extremely formidable. However, in Neutra's opinion, it might also be because the strength of those failed ones was too weak. The Arrancar that had not been strengthened by the Hogyoku had not even mastered Resurrection, which could not be regarded as a real Arrancar at all.
Of course, if Uehara Shiroa was really as powerful as the legend said, then Neutra wouldn't mind seeing it for himself. His strongest hero wasn't for nothing. He hoped that by then, his opponent would not be too desperate. Of course that man is strong. Ulquiorra looked at Neutra as if he was looking at a dead man.
He saw the other party's carelessness and the arrogance engraved in his bones. That supposedly invulnerable hero did give him strong confidence. Ulquiorra admitted that even among the Espada, Neutra's hero had reached the level of special talent. So when facing Uehara Shiroa, this guy would die particularly miserably. Facing that man, any arrogance or self-confidence was suicide. In fact, there were many among the Espada who had similar ideas to Neutra. After all, they had not been cut down by Uehara Shiroa, and they didn't know the true power of the spacetime Zanpakuto. Moreover, each of them had unique skills and had come this far by stepping on the corpses of millions of hollows. Each of them had experienced a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, and they were all geniuses among 10,000. Furthermore, the Hogyoku and becoming Arrancar had further strengthened their potential and talents. Therefore, they had the capital for confidence and the confidence for arrogance.
Chapter 158.
Therefore, some of the Espada really wanted to see what was so great about this Uehara Shiroa. He had made a great name for himself by stepping on the corpses of Hueco Mundo and the Great Hollows. But that was just luck, they thought. They wanted Uehara Shiroa to understand that the current Hueco Mundo was no longer the same as it was before. This was their territory, not a place where he could come and go as he pleased.
Times had changed. Of course, among all the Espada, the one who valued Uehara Shiroa the most was Sailaporo.
He had suffered a great loss at the hands of Uehara. Back then, if he had not been seriously injured by Uehara Shiroa, he would not have split his soul in such a hurry. Although Sailaporo never thought that the path he chose was wrong, there was a world of difference between active choices and passive choices. This was a shame for him. More importantly, Sailaporo had not yet developed a way to counter Uehara Shiroa's ability. This was a shame among shames. For him who pursued perfection, Uehara Shiroa's powerful strength and existence was a thorn that stuck firmly in his heart. So when the other Espada followed Aizen's orders and chose to wait and see, Sailaporo had already taken active action. This time, he wanted to take back everything he had lost. At this moment, Aizen was showing the Hogyoku to Orihime Inoue. The Hogyoku was his most important secret. Before he started, he even asked his two Arrancar subordinates, Loli and Minoli, to withdraw, leaving Orihime Inoue alone. The two subordinates who were driven out felt very unhappy. The two female Arrancar said bitterly, "How could a woman like that be qualified to be alone with Master Aizen?"
"What? That stinky human." Instantly, the two had a very bad impression of Orihime Inoue. Ulquiorra, who was guarding the door, remained silent.
He couldn't understand the fights between men, let alone the fights between women. On the platform, Aizen had already activated his Ryatsu and opened the instrument that contained the Hogyoku.
"Can you help me take a look, Orihime Inoue?"
As his voice fell, a blue stone pillar rose from the platform.
The top of the stone pillar cracked, revealing a round gem wrapped in a blue transparent cube.
The mysterious gem had an almost transparent glass shell, with a white-purple halo inside. This halo burned and jumped like a living flame, releasing an indescribable mysterious atmosphere. Feeling this energy, Orihime Inoue was suddenly startled, as if she realized something.
Noticing Orihime Inoue's expression, Aizen nodded and said, "It seems that you already know."
"Yes, this is the Hogyoku. Because of its recent short awakenings, the power of the Hogyoku is a little weakened. However, it is indeed moving towards a fully awakened state. Whether it is to transform a hollow or create an oken, it is inseparable from the power of the Hogyoku. So, this is my most important secret. I show it to you only because I believe in you. Your ability is very remarkable, and you can reject existing phenomena. And this can help the Hogyoku awaken as soon as possible.
So, can I trust you and believe that your ability can be used by me, Oraheim? Yes, Master Aizen. Oraheim Inoue answered without hesitation.
Her tone was very firm, but her eyes were a little empty.
Very good.
Looking at the girl in front of him who seemed to be about to break down, Aizen showed a very smug smile. After returning to her room, Oraheim Inoue thought silently, I don't believe what that man said.
He definitely didn't show me the Hogyoku because he trusted me. He must have other purposes.
Although I can't guess what he's thinking, I now know the location of the Hogyoku, and my ability is to reject reality. Through my ability, the Hogyoku can enter a fully awakened state in advance. Thinking of the news that Ulquiorra had brought about Ichigo Kurosaki and the others coming to Hueco Mundo, she looked into the distance and confirmed her thoughts.
Thank you for coming to save me, Ichigo. But I also want to do something. Moreover, there must be something that only I can do. That is to delay time until everyone is ready.
Although Oraheim Inoue looked silly and seemed to be easily deceived, now she stood out as a sober person. If she wasn't scheming and strong enough, she, a helpless little girl, would not have been able to grow up healthily. At the same time, Ichigo Kurosaki had passed through the rock passage and came to a palace guarded by Arrancar. And Aizen, sitting on his throne, laughed with satisfaction. Oraheim Inoue's performance and self-sacrifice did not surprise him.
However, the arrival of Ichigo Kurosaki and Uehara Shiroa surprised him very much.
One of them had unlimited potential, and the other had countless trump cards.
These two Shinigami were so interesting. Under deliberate arrangement, Ichigo Kurosaki met the eccentric Storm Baron, also known as Arrancar No. 103, Dordoni Alessandro del Sicaccio. The three-digit Arrancars were all former Espada, and they were also abandoned Espada. They were the eliminated Espada. These Arrancars used to be Espada, but because of insufficient strength or other reasons, they lost the title and became three-digit Arrancars. Ichigo Kurosaki already knew about the origin of the three-digit Arrancars. Because the strength of these former Espada was definitely not as good as the current Espada, Ichigo stubbornly did not want to use Bankai. On the one hand, he wanted to retain his strength to deal with stronger enemies in the future. On the other hand, if he had to use all his strength to face such an eliminated Espada, how could he defeat an opponent of the Espada level like Grimmjow? Then, Ichigo was severely taught a lesson by the Storm Baron. It was just that his current state was unstable and his strength fluctuated greatly. He had a serious lack of understanding and control of his own power. And Dordoni was the kind of person who looked funny but really had substance in battle. With his current strength or mentality, it was impossible for Ichigo to defeat Dordoni with only Shirkai. The opponent proved with strength that even if he was an abandoned Espada, he was once an Espada, and he was not trash that could be easily dismissed. After a fight, the stubborn Ichigo was almost beaten into a pulp. Ichigo, who was in a delicate period, realized that he had underestimated his opponent. So, he activated his Bankai and donned his hollow mask, giving Dordoni the due respect he wanted. Storm Baron Dordoni had always hoped that Ichigo Kurosaki would use his Bankai and fight seriously. However, he didn't expect the other party to be so serious and respectful. Unsurprisingly, he was defeated on the spot, and then he was killed by the Exequias team led by Rutaban. The Exequias were similar to the Onmitsukido of the Gotei 13. They were a team that specialized in dealing with their own people and were responsible for handling Arrancars who failed in combat. The captain of this special team was Arrancar No. 61, Rutaban. After all, Las Noches was not like the underground passage, where the defeated Arrancar could be destroyed at will. Therefore, only this special force led by Rutaban could deal with the losers. Again, Las Noches did not keep useless people. But this time, Rutaban had other purposes, which were to hunt down the injured invader Ichigo Kurosaki and collect the Ryatsu of Uehara Shiroha. The former was easy to accomplish, but the latter made him a little unsure. Because to some extent, Uehara Shiroha was a taboo existence like Aizen and Baragon. In Hueco Mundo, the name of the White Devil represented death. If you met this person, you met the real Shinigami. This person's name was built on the sea of blood and corpses composed of countless hollows. It was said that in recent years, this person had no interest in Hueco Mundo and hunting hollows,
otherwise it was unknown how many hollows would have died at his hands.
So even if he received orders from the Octava Espada Sail Aparo, Rutaban still decided to stay away from Uehara Shiroha. As for the injured Shinigami in front of him,
I'm sorry, he would take his head.
Like Ichigo, Yuryu Ishida and Yasutora Sato also encountered two three-digit Arankars.
Yuryu Ishida encountered the Yo-Yo Girl, that is, Arankar no.
105, Sirachi Sander Witchy.
The weapon of this former espada particularly resembled a yo-yo, combining speed, flexibility, and power. She wore a princess dress and was dressed rather strangely.
Yasutora Sato encountered Arankar number 107, Gantenbane Musketa, whose Zanpakuto was called Drigra. Gantenbane and Yasutora Sato had a sense of mutual respect.
Both of their fighting styles were full of passion.
After battle, Yuryu Ishida and Yasutora Sato realized that even the eliminated espada should not be underestimated. If the former espada were already so strong, how strong must the current espada be?
However, even so, they still had no intention of backing down. In order to save their companions, whether it was the former espada or the current espada, they would defeat them all.
In the Hueco Mundo Desert, Uehara Shiroha's observation haki swept across the landscape. He did not pay attention to the fights between Ichigo Kurosaki and the others.
For him, only the battles of the espada were worth watching. At this moment, he focused his attention on the deeper power of the world. Combining the unlimited blade works and the extremely real-world laws in the sky, Uehara Shiroha stretched out his right hand and gently launched Ryatsu at the desert.
In an instant, a seedling broke through the soil.
For the first time, Hueco Mundo, which had been desolate for countless thousands of years, was rejuvenated and ushered in new life.
What is this? Nell's eyes widened.
Her eyes were shining like light bulbs, and she even drooled.
It looks delicious. Uehara Shiroha retracted his right hand, looked at the ever-changing cold crescent moon in the sky, and replied calmly, "You can think of this as a required course to become God."
A compulsory course for God?
What is that?
Little Nell tilted her head, looking confused, very cute.
Uehara Shiroha stood with his hands behind his back. With your intelligence, it's hard for me to explain it to you. This is not something you should consider.
What you should do most now is to become a qualified maid. As a maid, Nell was really unqualified. She could be said to be the worst maid that Uehara Shiroha had ever ordered. Normally, she was like a hyperactive child, always busy and screaming. When she was asked to hammer his shoulders and massage, she was like a sleepyhead, and could even fall asleep. She could sleep while standing, which was also a gift. Moreover, she had no sense of boundaries and was shameless. If you gave her a little encouragement, she dared to use the rocket headbutt on him. As an energetic and tough kid, Nell could still provide some emotional value, but she really deserved a beating.
Uehara Shiroha also understood why Neutra didn't kill Nell even after a sneak attack and a secret plot. Nell was naturally lively and active, very energetic, and had very strong vitality. It was indeed not easy to kill her.
Hearing the word maid, Nell instantly wilted, and she was just about to put on a pained expression, muttering, "It is impossible to work, not in this lifetime."
Shiroha ignored her and looked at the sapling that was gradually withering under his feet.
At first glance, his technique was not as good as Yamato's house-building technique, and was a bankrupt version of wood release. But in the world of Shinigami, in Hueco Mundo, this move had immeasurable significance and potential. Uehara Shiroha was now certain that this world was really an idealistic existence. The power of the mind and soul had unimaginable power. In this world, it was not matter that determined the world, but will that determined the world and determined power. Will had substantial power and could even determine the direction and composition of the world. Whether it was the power of the Shinigami, the power of the Quincy, or the power of the Hollow, they all had their own characteristics or will. It was like every person's soul had certain traits. This trait corresponded to authority, rules, and powerful abilities. Because of this, the power of the Shinigami had the ability to purify hollows and guide souls, and could extend the four basic abilities of Zankinsoki, sword, spirit energy, body, and demon arts. The power of the Quincy had the characteristics of controlling Raisher and annihilating spirits.
The source of these two abilities could be traced back to the Soul King. It could be said that the power of the Shinigami and the power of the Quincy both had part of the will of the Soul King and were an extension of his soul power. Similar to the relationship between the Sage of Six Paths and Chakra. Uehara Shiroa guessed that the will represented by the Soul King should be the will of the original world, that is, the power of order and boundaries. In the final analysis, it was the emergence of the primordial world that ended the chaotic era in which spirits and souls no longer existed. The will represented by the hollow was the will of chaos. With such a will, the strongest ancient hollow could devour all spirits and souls, returning the world to the chaotic era. At this time, the Soul King appeared. He killed the ancient hollow that could devour the world, and sacrificed himself to become a wedge, stabilizing the three realms and continuing the primordial era. In the eyes of Uehara Shiroa, the power of the hollow and the will of the hollow were nothingness. This was the chaotic power that returned the world to nothingness. In this respect, Ulquiorra was worthy of being a natural hollow, and was the existence closest to the origin of the hollow. Because of the existence of boundaries, in the past, souls and various races had insurmountable limits. The power of the hollow could break boundaries, and hollowification could naturally break racial limits. For souls, boundaries must exist. This was a constraint on them and also a protection for them. Therefore, for the Shinigami, hollowification had the risk of losing control and might even cause the soul to self-annihilate. But now, Uehara Shiroa had distorted the rules to some extent. He constructed a boundary that was not affected by the power of the hollow. He influenced the rules of Hueco Mundo with his personal will and created vitality that did not belong to Hueco Mundo. This was a power that only gods could have. Uehara Shiroa created this miracle with the body of a Shinigami, which was truly surpassing the gods with a mortal body. Chapter 159. The most critical of these was the unlimited blade works. Only the power of EX skill could pry open the basic rules of the world and bring the power of Shunkyo to the extreme, even beyond the original limit. The Mind Gem could maximize the power of the mind and had an effect similar to creating a soul. In this way, Uehara Shiroa could fully materialize the power of Shunkyo's small world. It was a pity that his Ryatsu wasn't enough now, and he couldn't really create a world. However, such means couldn't be achieved even by ordinary transcendence. In this regard, Shiroa thought to himself, it's meaningless to just bend the rules. However, I have a clearer plan for the future. I just need to slowly complete the tasks and get the rewards, and then I can change the world naturally. As long as I am strong enough, I am the world. In the Soul King Palace, in the Phoenix Hall of the Huden, Otsunemeya, who was dressed like a rapper, frowned and exclaimed, "It's so cool that something like this actually happened. How did this happen? If it was just Shirkai or Bankai, the Zanpakuto wouldn't have changed like this, and I couldn't even lock its position. Uehara Shiroa, right? You really gave me a lot of surprises." As the third member of the Zero Division, the God of the Sword, and the administrator of the Phoenix Hall, Otsunemeya had the title of Sword God. This was because he was good at forging swords, and more importantly, because he was the creator of Zanpakuto. Since the birth of Soul Society, all Zanpakuto had been made by him. He could know the location and status of all Zanpakuto. This was his ability and his power. All Zanpakuto, all Asachi, could not be hidden from his perception and observation. The name Sword God was well earned. Except for that sword, the sword that belonged to Uehara Shiroa. From the beginning, the Sword God vaguely sensed the extraordinariness of that sword. A Zanpakuto like this had unimaginable potential, and it might even be on par with the strongest Zanpakuto such as Ryujin Jaka and Hyarinmaru. Sure enough, the power of that sword became stronger and stronger, and in the end it even reached the level of ancient artifacts such as Ikemanji and Nanao's Shinken Hakioken. The more mysterious and unpredictable the aura became, the more it made people wary. Until now, the sword had suddenly jumped to a new level, a realm that even the sword god Otsunemeya could not see through or even understand. Not only could he not sense the strength, potential, or specific location of this sword, he could not even sense its existence, as if this sword no longer existed in this world. But this was actually impossible.
Not to mention that the owner of the sword, Uehara Shiroha, was still alive. Even if the owner of the sword died, the Zanpakuto would still exist and would not escape his perception. As the sword god, as the creator of Zanpakuto, as a member of the Zero Division, he was actually surpassed by the sword he forged with his own hands.
This was really unexpected and shocking.
After a moment of exclamation, Otsunomiya chose to report the news to the captain of the Zero Division. After hearing the news, the tall Ichibe Hayasup stroked his black beard and frowned, as if he realized something.
He laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, this is interesting. I control the names of everything, including Zanpakuto. A name is power. This is the case with Zanpakuto's release in Bankai.
But now, the sword's Bankai has not changed its true name. Logically, the sword's ability shouldn't change too much, and it shouldn't be out of your control.
If this happens, it can only mean that Uehara Shiroha has obtained some amazing opportunity. As a traditional old bureaucrat, the monk didn't like variables like Uehara Shiroha.
At the beginning, he didn't take him seriously. Because relying on the revelations of the Soul King, he could peek into the future. Coupled with his ability to control the true name of all things, it was not an exaggeration to say that he could control the present and the future. Therefore, although Uehara Shiroha's talent was amazing, since the Soul King did not alert him, it meant that Uehara could not affect their plans. Even now, Ichibe Hayasup thought the same. It was just that he had previously believed the other party would not fully develop before dying.
When Uehara Shiroha developed Bankai, this possibility was almost zero.
Vaguely hearing about the horror of the sword, Ichibe Hayasup thought that with Uehara Shiroha's character and ability, it was impossible for him to be killed. Then, if the Soul King did not warn him, it could only mean that Uehara's existence would have no effect on their plans. As for why his Zanpakuto had suddenly become this undefinable entity, there were many possibilities. Because he had no specific information, Ichibe Hayasup could not make an accurate judgment. With his cautious character, he did not take action before Uehara Shiroha grew up, and it was even more impossible for him to take action now. He made the same choice as Yhwach and Aizen, to wait and see. Hearing Ichibe Hayasup's answer, the sword god Otsunomiya was suddenly startled and could not help but exclaim, "Is this the will of that lord?" If Uehara Shiroha had obtained the protection of the Soul King or the Soul King's power, then everything would make sense. The power of the Soul King was not only something he couldn't see through or sense, but even Ikemanji's Shirafute Ikemanji and Yhwach's the Almighty could not affect it. No, the Soul King did not pay attention to Uehara Shiroha, Ichibe Hayasup said, thinking of another possibility. It could also be the power of hell. If that person made a move, then everything would make sense. Thinking of the existence in hell that even the Soul King couldn't see through, the sword god Otsunomiya and Zero Squad leader Ichibe Hayasup both had a headache. But they were confident. The two were old monsters who had lived for countless tens of thousands of years, experienced countless storms and waves, and witnessed countless evil beings. A mere Shinigami would not make them panic. However, the two old monsters never for a moment considered that Uehara Shiroha had relied on his own ability to make his Zanpakuto reach transcendence. In Las Noches, Rukia met her destined enemy, the Noveno Espada, Arañero Ararori. Unlike those three-digit Arancars, this one was a real Espada. Moreover, Arañero was the only Espada that evolved from the lower-level Jillian class of Hollow. He was also one of the first batch of Hollows to be transformed into Arancar. Arañero especially liked to use tactics and had a particularly devious heart. His ability was also in line with his insidious character, and it sounded very impressive. Arañero's ability was called Infinite Evolution, and his Zanpakuto was called Glotniria, which could seize the abilities and Ryatsu of other Hollows to achieve infinite evolution. He claimed to have devoured 33,650 Hollows, and had infinite possibilities in the future, making him an invincible existence. Even Octava Espada Sailaparo actually wanted to study him. If it weren't for Aizen's protection, he would have killed that bastard long ago. Although he was very arrogant, in fact, he was only the ninth of the Espada. And Yami was nominally the Decimo Espada, but in fact, he was the Ciro Espada, which was outside the ranking. Therefore, Arañero was the Noveno Espada, the weakest of the numbered Espada. Although his strength and ranking were at the bottom of the Espada, Aranyero was very confident. His words were full of the heroic spirit of heroes don't care about their origins, and the Espada don't care about their rankings, even to the point of being conceited. Of course, facing Rukia, Aranyero had reason to be conceited. The reason was that he had devoured the hollow that killed Miyako Shiba and possessed Kaion Shiba. The name of that hollow was Metastasia, and it had the ability to seal the Zanpakuto of a Shinigami infused with spirits. It was this hollow that sealed Kaion Shiba's Zanpakuto, thereby killing the head of the Shiba family, and used the ability of spirit fusion to absorb Kaion Shiba's spirit. Metastasia was actually the product of Aizen's experiment. It was special research on Shinigami, and also a chess piece to test the Gotei 13 and the great noble houses at that time. Through this attack, Aizen determined that neither the great noble houses nor the Gotei 13 was anything great. There was really nothing to pay attention to for an existence that could be controlled by an experimental product, and the threat level was not even as great as that of Uehara Shiroha alone. Metastasia achieved an amazing record in its brief appearance. Not only did it kill the vice-captain of the 13th Division, Kaion Shiba, but it almost killed the captain of the 13th Division, Jushiro Yukitake. As an ordinary hollow, its record could make the Espada feel ashamed. A group of arrogant Espada didn't even kill a single Shinigami in the end, and their record was 0. In the entire battle, only Aizen killed 2 well-known Shinigami, one of whom was Kaname Tozen and the other was Jin Ikamaru. The two were indeed captain-level combatants, but it was a pity that they were his own people. Aizen's behavior of swiping heads with his own people was indeed a bit unrefined. Aranyero swallowed Metastasia, who was seriously injured by Rukia, and only then did he gain the ability to fuse with another's spirit body. He also gained the Ryatsu, memory, and experience of Kaion Shiba. As a result, he gained the ability to evolve infinitely, and was able to transform into Kaion Shiba without any flaws, and even use Kaion Shiba's Zanpakuto as Shirkai. Through memory, he knew that Rukia and Kaion Shiba were close. Therefore, he pretended to be Kaion Shiba and first had a chat with Rukia, and then launched a sneak attack. In his opinion, he had an absolute advantage in strength, intelligence, and psychological control. How could he lose? Rukia's performance was much more impressive than in the original timeline. In the original timeline, the reason why she was able to defeat Aranyero was entirely because the other party was too careless. It was just that this time, Rukia's strength had improved a lot. Moreover, the original knot in her heart was also weakened a lot under the strong comfort of Uehara Shiroha. Therefore, even if Aranyero pretended to be Kaion Shiba to attack her, Rukia did not suffer much. In terms of strength, she was much stronger than in the original timeline. What's more, she had Bankai as a life-saving trump card. Therefore, Aranyero died without any surprise. This was the first fallen Espada. In the distance, Uehara Shiroha paid some attention to the battle. Rukia did not disappoint him and successfully took down the first Espada. This was also within his expectations. After all, this Aranyero had no other skills except talking tough, and his ability was also weak. He said that he could absorb the abilities and Ryatsu of other hollows, and he claimed to have swallowed 33,650 hollows. As a result, even when pretending to be Kaion Shiba and attacking, Rukia was not hurt. His Ryatsu was pitifully weak. In the world of Bleach, if there was no Ryatsu support, no matter how fancy the ability was, it was useless. On this issue, Leelbaro and other stern Ritter who were killed by Otsunimea in seconds had something to say. If it weren't for Yawacha's Oswalin and strengthening their Ryatsu, they really couldn't have passed the 0 division. From the beginning, Uehara Shiroha didn't regard the Espada below the top 3 as worthy opponents. Ulquiorra was a little interesting, but only a little interesting. The Ryatsu and abilities of the other top 3 Espada were barely worth seeing, and they were at the level of being able to fight. But they couldn't last more than a few moves, and he could crush them if he was a little more serious. Of course, this was based on Uehara Shiroha's tyrannical strength. He had the confidence to look down on the top 3 Espada. But in the eyes of others, the top 3 Espada were all extremely strong, far beyond the ordinary captains. Thinking of this, Uehara Shiroha's observation haki locked onto Aizen in Las Noches, who combed his hair like an elegant gentleman. The Espada were just tools, and the only really tricky ones were the Hogyoku and Aizen. Aizen fused with the complete Hogyoku was indeed very challenging. Of course, the challenge that Uehara Shiroha referred to was not whether he would win or not, but whether he could win completely. With the unlimited blade works in Shunkyo, he would be invincible unless a strong individual at the Soul King candidate level took action. Aizen, who had fused with the Hogyoku, was indeed a variable, but Uehara already knew the limit of this variable, so he was not to be feared. The key was that Aizen, who had given up the power of the Shinigami and the Zanpakuto, was actually easier to deal with. This was a mistake made by his opponent, an unavoidable mistake. Aizen actually chose a road of no return, an unknown path of evolution. This was the beauty of evolution, and the wrong evolution looked right. Aizen calculated everything, but in the end he still embarked on this unknown road. This was a bit inconsistent with his opponent's habit of being cautious, but it was Aizen's only choice.
In fact, in terms of conspiracy and calculation, both Aizen and Kasuke Urahara were at the same level.
The two also knew that it was necessary and safest to proceed step by step and act cautiously. They both had the ability to prepare for battle to the extreme, both before and after.
However, there were sometimes limitations, and Shinigami had their limits.
Even if they could do every detail to perfection, they would still encounter invincible enemies and insurmountable barriers. This was the limitation of the Shinigami. The difference was that Kasuke Urahara chose to be patient, admitted his own shortcomings, and chose the mediocre path of being content with the status quo. Aizen chose to take a risk and wanted to use the Hogyoku and holification to win a way to the sky in the darkness. Hundreds of years of calculation and accumulation, just to transcend the limit and sit on the throne in the sky. And all of this was at the fingertips of Uehara Shiroha. As long as he was alive, he could surpass the limit and laugh to the end. Lying down to win was a portrayal of his life. Therefore, although Uehara Shiroha understood Aizen's choice, he really didn't envy or yearn for it at all. However, he could accept the other party's highest masterpiece with a smile.
Aizen, you can't control the Hogyoku. Leave it to me.
Thank you for your hard work.
Chapter 160. At this moment, Aizen looked towards the direction of Uehara Shiroha. Just then, an errand car from the Exequias came over and reported, Master Aizen, Dordoni encountered the invader Ichigo Kurosaki and unfortunately died in battle. Sirachi Sanderwichi and Gantenbane are in a tough fight.
I understand.
Aizen looked at the half-kneeling errand car with an indifferent look.
However, you should have something else to report to me, right? Who ordered the Exequias to pursue Kurosaki Ichigo without authorization? He had previously ordered each of the Espada to stay at Las Noches and not to act without authorization. But it was obvious that a few of the Espada had thoughts they shouldn't have and took action secretly. He had anticipated this. The actions and thoughts of these Espada were also part of the plan. Facing Aizen's questioning, the errand car on the ground felt like he was falling into an ice cellar, and cold sweat instantly flowed down. At this moment, he was under unimaginable pressure. Just a simple question made his whole body numb and unable to move. Just when this errand car was about to collapse mentally, Sailaporo Grands, the Octava Espada, walked in. He was still the same, with pink hair, golden pupils, and glasses, looking like a decent person. It was he who ordered the Exequias to deal with the injured Ichigo Kurosaki. Even Uehara Shiroha. Seeing that things could not be concealed, he showed up. This was not the first time he had done such a thing. A long time ago, Sailaporo became interested in Uehara Shiroha's power. At that time, he was still a Ciro Espada, and used the former Segunda Espada Barragan and others to test Uehara Shiroha. After that, he personally tried to take down Uehara Shiroha, but was beaten so badly that his mother could not recognize him, and his body was torn apart. It was also because of that battle that the severely injured Sailaporo was forced to split himself and became the current Octava Espada. After the matter was exposed, he was still thinking about being clever to hide it from Aizen. But he was completely seen through. So this time, Sailaporo learned his lesson and told his inner thoughts in detail, Lord Aizen, I am doing this to defeat that Uehara Shiroha. And Uehara Shiroha alone is difficult enough to deal with, and with the addition of Ichigo Kurosaki who has amazing potential, I am worried that things will get out of control. That's why I thought of letting the exequias deal with the injured Ichigo Kurosaki, so as not to affect your plan.
Of course, this is also for my research.
He was not lying, but the former was secondary and the latter was the key. For him, it didn't matter who won or lost, as long as he could perfect his research. The experimental materials this time were especially important to him. After all, the power of Ichigo Kurosaki and Uehara Shiroa really attracted him. In particular, Uehara Shiroa's power of time and space was like a black hole, extremely mysterious, which fascinated him very much.
So, I see. You can go now. Aizen had a calm face.
He knew that what Sailaporo said was true, but not entirely true.
He was too lazy to make an extra expression.
Aizen had no expectations for the other party's research. In his opinion, Sailaporo was already a dead man.
There would be no results for a dead man.
He was already a dead man since the day this guy set his sights on Uehara Shiroa. The reason why he was able to survive until now was not because of his cleverness or the protection of Las Noches, but because Uehara Shiroa felt that this guy was still useful.
Aizen had no intention of reminding or saving the other party.
If he could use an espada to hold back Uehara Shiroa, even for a short time, that would be great.
It was a very good deal.
Sailaporo regarded others as chess pieces and research materials, but in the eyes of Aizen, the other party was the chess piece and experimental subject.
After Ichigo Kurosaki and Rukia, Yuryu Ishida and Yasutora Sato also defeated their enemies respectively.
Even though they were trapped in the enemy's base camp and knew the horror of the Arrancar and the Espada, the four of them chose to move on without hesitation. In addition to rescuing Orihime Inoue, they all had reasons not to give up. Needless to say, Ichigo Kurosaki and the other two needed to prevent Aizen from sacrificing Karakura Town and the 100,000 souls there to create the Oken.
If they didn't fight hard, they would lose their hometown.
As a Shinigami, Rukia had the responsibility to protect the Soul King and the residents of Karakura Town. Here, Ichigo Kurosaki, Yuryu Ishida, and Rukia continued to move forward.
Yasutora Sato followed the blasted wall and came to the desert again.
In the white desert, he saw an Arrancar walking towards him. This man was tall, wearing a white coat, with long black hair parted in the middle, an eye patch on his left eye, and a strange weapon in the shape of a huge crescent scythe in his hand.
The opponent's weapon was very long, with two huge crescent-shaped curved blades, and a long black chain on the handle.
The most important thing is that Sato felt a heavy pressure from this Arrancar. There was such an oppressive force without an outburst of Ryatsu.
The person who came must be one of the Espada.
Fortunately, after coming to Hueco Mundo, he had awakened the attack form of his left arm, the left arm of the devil, Brazo Izquierda del Diablo, which had amazing power.
Now both of his arms had powerful abilities, so he would definitely win.
Just like Kensei Muguruma doesn't like to waste time in battle, Sato would only fight with all his strength. This time was no exception. He decided to finish off the enemy with one punch. So, Sato swung Brazo Izquierda del Diablo and launched the strongest attack on the guy with a weird smile on his face, who looked like a praying mantis. His punch hit the opponent's stomach hard, and shock waves spread out like a hurricane, blowing away a lot of sand. Wild sand flew around, filling the air, and then bursts of roars sounded. However, after one punch, the opponent's feet were only slightly off the ground, and his skin was not even broken.
"This is your greatest strength? Is that all?"
Neutra Gilga, the Quinto Espada, had a look of disdain on his face, and his smile became more and more mysterious. Next, he swung the huge side-like Zanpakuto in his hand without hesitation and chopped Sato to the ground. Unlike the Noveno Espada Arañero, Neutra was the Quinto Espada, and he had a unique skill.
His Hierro was extremely strong, the strongest among the Espada.
For the truly strong, Neutra was just a target with thicker skin, and it was a little more difficult to cut through at most. But for opponents of the same level or weaker, facing such an enemy that could not be broken through, there was only despair in their hearts. This ability belongs to the category of bullying invincibility. When the weak encounter such an enemy, there is no possibility of turning the tables. No matter how careless the opponent is, it is meaningless if you cannot hurt them.
And Sato was so lucky.
In the Soul Society arc, he had just cleared the minor opponents when he met the elite captain Shunsui Kairaku, which was equivalent to meeting the ultimate boss just after leaving the novice village. Without any suspense, he was knocked to the ground by Shunsui Kairaku. After coming to Hueco Mundo, Sato met another person whose ability was naturally his counter, Neutra. During the 1,000-year Blood War, he had to face Yawatch and the Stern Ritter, who were strengthened by Oswalin. You know, Ichigo Kurosaki was born at the maximum level. Yuryu Ishida unlocked the antithesis cheat, and the ability of Orihime Inoue was praised by the big guys. Only Yasutora Sato was like his skin color, plain and unpretentious, and had hardly been strengthened before and after. Even so, he had to encounter high-level opponents one after another. If life was a game, then he was playing on hell difficulty. His adventure was really something. And his deep skin color and unfortunate experiences also vividly interpreted what it meant to have bad luck. However, the strong never complain about the environment. So after the 1,000-year Blood War, Yasutora Sato, who was at the captain level, chose to become an ordinary boxer. Since you can't beat the big guys, choose the right opponents. After knocking down Yasutora Sato, Neutra did not choose to finish him off, and even ignored the opponent's desperate attack. His Fraction, Tessera Lindocruz, was very puzzled by this. Lord Neutra, this is too dangerous. What if? There is no such thing as a chance of disaster. Neutra ruthlessly interrupted the other party's kind reminder and said confidently, my body is the strongest. No matter whether it is a Shinigami or an Arrancar, it is impossible to hurt me. I will kill all those invaders. This will prove that I am the strongest Espada. At this moment, although Ichigo Kurosaki, Yuryu Ishida, and Rukia noticed that there was a problem with Sato's Ryatsu, it was too late for them to rescue him. Because they all encountered extremely difficult Espada. At this time, they could only trust in Sato. Yuryu Ishida encountered the Octava Espada Sailaporo. The enemy was the former Ciro Espada, a senior Vasto Lord-level Arrancar, who was both intellectual and powerful, and had an absolute home advantage. And Yuryu was accompanied by only two generals, Pesh and Dando Chaka. The extremely unfavorable situation and the two comedic teammates who were holding him back, Yuryu Ishida wanted to play 20 questions with fate. Rukia was not much better. After defeating Aranyaro, her physical strength and Ryatsu had been consumed. Then, a more sinister Arrancar appeared again. Septima Espada Zamari Roros was not a fake like Aranyaro. This guy's transformation to Arrancar was the fastest, and he also had a strange cursed eye ability. He could stare at the enemy with his strange eyes and control them. If he stared at the brain, he could control the enemy's entire body. All the parts that were stared at would be marked with strange patterns. Facing such an enemy with control, output, and speed, Rukia had no chance of winning and fell into a difficult battle. Fortunately, she had experienced special training from Uehara Shiroha and was used to unfavorable situations. It must be said that anyone who had been specially trained by Uehara Shiroha, apart from anything else, had the ability to withstand pressure. Therefore, even if she was at an absolute disadvantage, Rukia could still make the most reasonable and quickest decisions. It was just that the gap in strength could not be offset, and it was only a matter of time before she lost. The sinister Zamari was not in a hurry to kill. He wanted to play the long game and catch the big fish. In his opinion, killing Rukia was nothing. Only by killing a strong man like Ichigo Kurosaki could he be considered loyal to Aizen. And now Ichigo Kurosaki didn't need Zamari to take action, he was almost dying. Because he met the Cuarto Espada Ulquiorra, the Arrancar he had encountered in the human world. After undergoing hollow training, Ichigo thought he had shortened the distance between himself and the Espada. However, he did not have much hostility towards Ulquiorra. He came to Hueco Mundo just to rescue his companions, and before, Ulquiorra did not kill his friends. The main reason was that the absolute calmness of the other party without a trace of murderous intent was too confusing. Therefore, he wanted to bypass the other party and move on. After listening to what Ichigo Kurosaki said, Ulquiorra made a judgment in his heart: this Shinigami has not made any progress not only in strength, but also in character. At this time, he is still so naive. The potential that Lord Aizen has high hopes for is only at this level.
It is a bit disappointing. Thinking of this, he said calmly, if it was me who brought Orihime Inoue to Hueco Mundo, would you still remain indifferent?
Upon hearing this, Ichigo became angry, turned around and slashed at Ulquiorra, shouting, Inoue didn't come to Hueco Mundo of her own accord.
She's not a traitor. Do you know how much trouble this will cause her?
According to the investigation of the Gotei 13, Orihime Inoue took the initiative to leave the human world and go to Hueco Mundo.
No one forced her during the process.
Ichigo strongly disagreed with the judgment of the Gotei 13.
He absolutely did not believe that Orihime Inoue would betray them and take the initiative to join Aizen.
It's just that before, he had no evidence.
You have wavered and doubted before, right?
Ulquiorra easily blocked the attack of Shirkai Zangetsu with his arm and said calmly, in the final analysis, it is because you lack trust in each other.
She doesn't believe in your power. Otherwise, she wouldn't have made such a choice. You.
Ichigo Kurosaki was furious after his mind was critically hit. He first used Chuunpa to distance himself and activated his Bankai, then slashed forward with a fierce blow. The extremely powerful Ryatsu gathered on the black blade, and finally formed a powerful slash like a flash. Facing the powerful red and black slash, Ulquiorra put one hand in his pocket and raised the other hand in a defensive posture. There was no fluctuation in his emerald pupils, and he obviously did not take Ichigo Kurosaki's attack seriously. As soon as he came into contact with this Ryatsu, he frowned and thought to himself.
The force is a little stronger than I thought. Is it Bankai?
Strange slash, strange Ryatsu, even a bit like Arcero.
Is it the unique ability of Zanpakuto?
This Ryatsu is just like ours. As he was thinking, he saw the hollow mask covering Ichigo Kurosaki's face. He was slightly shocked.
But even so, Ulquiorra still blocked Ichigo Kurosaki's slash without any injury.
It was just that because the impact was too strong, his body was forced to fly backwards, breaking several stone pillars.
But that was all.
Soon, Ulquiorra stabilized his body, stepped on a stone pillar, and flew back to the ground again.
Getsuga Tensho.
Ichigo Kurosaki, who was in the hollow state, slashed out a black Getsuga Tensho at Ulquiorra and said confidently, it's over.
The black Getsuga Tensho in the hollow state of Bankai had amazing power. In fact, this move was the ultimate move of his inner hollow. Although Ichigo Kurosaki could not recognize the hollow style of behavior, he was very sure of the opponent's strength. Therefore, he was very confident about this move. Just like before, Ulquiorra still raised his arm confidently and blocked the powerful slash like a black dragon with one hand. But this time the slash was much stronger than he expected. He immediately switched to defending with both hands, but was still knocked back. Ichigo Kurosaki breathed a sigh of relief when he saw this. The opponent's strength was unfathomable, which made him feel a lot of pressure. The key was that he couldn't maintain the hollow form for a long time. So the battle had to be quick and decisive. Ichigo Kurosaki had many doubts and concerns about the power of the hollow in his body. Therefore, he couldn't fight with all his strength, and he even felt restrained and powerless when fighting. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. Thanks so much for listening.
As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well.
See you in the next one.